Hello, Chessable friends. This is an introduction to the Evans Gambit Beginner's Guide, a course that I created in 2018, so nearly 7 years ago, but is still popular. I will split the introduction into two parts. The first part focuses on the Evans Gambit accepted and then 5 bishop c5 and the Evans Gambit declined. And then the next video will focus on the Evans Gambit accepted, but then bishop a5, bishop e7, and bishop d6. I'm going to do this not in the typical chess-based interface, but I'm going to do this in the Lichess environment so you can see my course philosophy and the choices I made and get a feel for what is important. And you can see here the Lichess database. And of course, what is very critical, if I go to the settings, that you should know by now that the way I structure my mini courses for club players is by looking at rapid and classical games in a rating band between 1600 and 2500. So that's the basis by which I select the line and prioritize the lines. So let's get started. Right, so e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5. And now you can see, actually, if I go here, right, b4 scores the best of all white moves. And there are 824,000 games currently in the Lichess database, rapid and classical, 1600 to 2500. And that's for me the basis. And as this is a beginner's guide, the question is, what should be the cutoff, right? So if you think like 1 in 100 games, then you are at 8,000 games. So when we go through it, I will show you how frequently a move occurs and how important it is to know the specifics. So after b4, right, let's go into b4. There are um, a few options. Bishop takes b4, 77% of the cases, and bishop b6 declined, 14% of the cases. And then knight b4, right, is a third option with 5%. But if you look at knight b4, the move knight b4, right, normally transposes back in the line where black plays bishop c5 after on the next move. So it is actually, when you think about it, it's like 82%, you could say, accepted and 14%, 14% declined. So let's first start to look at the accepted. So bishop takes b4. So here we are. And of course, we play the move c3, right? And after c3, our queen can go to b3, and because of b4, our bishop on c1 can go to a3, right? So these have become possibilities because of those pawn moves, and the bishop is under attack. So that is the first question, where is the bishop going? And so today we're going to focus on bishop c5, and then in the next video, it is bishop a5, bishop e7, and bishop d6. And before I go to bishop c5, I would just like to mention one thing. So when you look at the four moves, bishop c5, bishop a5, bishop e7, bishop d6, we always play the same move next, which is d4, right? So, and after d4, in most cases, black captures, right? So we play d4 on the next move, and if black captures, in the case of bishop c5, bishop a5, and bishop d6, we castle. So in 3 out of the 4 cases, and the only exception is bishop e7, right? So let me show you, um, so you understand why we don't castle after bishop e7. So bishop e7, then d4, right? And now after take, we play queen d3 because the pawn on f7 can no longer be defended. In other variations, there is queen e7 or queen f6. And because we first played d4, knight h6 no longer is a viable defense because the bishop on c1 can take the knight on h6. So let's go back. So a useful rule, right, if you want to think about um, what just in the beginning, right? So you're then a few moves already in the position, is that after any move, we continue d4. So you don't have to think, should I play queen b3 or castle? And after e takes d4, in all cases we castle, except for bishop e7, because after bishop e7, um, it's no longer possible for black to defend the pawn on f7, and that's why we take advantage of the opportunity and play queen b3. So let's go to the main dish. So here we are. We go to bishop c5, played in 41% of the games, right? Followed by bishop a5, it's 37%. So together they cover 78%. And then bishop e7 and bishop e6 are a distant third and fourth. So bishop c5. So from a chess perspective, this is a suboptimal move. Of course, when you look at at the, at the Evans Gambit, white gets a lead in development and more space. And bishop c5 will be attacked again and loses more time. But you can see this is the most played move, and that's why it is the first chapter. So let's explore how it continues. Right, so after bishop c5, we play our standard move that we play in all accepted lines. Black takes. And now, as I mentioned, we castle. The move we play after bishop c5 and bishop a5 and bishop d6. So let's have a look. In 53% of the cases, black takes. And in 14% of the cases, black plays d6, and in 11% of the cases, black plays knight f6. So combined, 25 plus 53 is a total of it's a total of 78%. And then we have one more option, knight g to e7. So let's start with the main dish, right? D takes c3, the most played move. And now, of course, a lot of players like this because undefended, the king is still in the middle, and then we can play bishop takes f7, and we have a double attack. So now you see, right, in 80% of the cases, king e8 is played. And in 19% of the cases, king f8. King f8 already is below the threshold of 1 in 100 games because we started with 824,000 games and we are left with 6,535. So we shouldn't go much deeper after King f8. So let's first look at King e8. King e8. And now instead of taking on c5, we first give a check, right? And why do we give this check? Because we want to provoke black for playing g6, weakening, right? So this is the idea, g6, and this weakens this diagonal, and that proves to be useful later. So this intermediate move is to provoke the weakness of the diagonal c3 to h8. And you can see in 84% of the cases, um, the move g6 is played, and if black plays king f8, then we're transposing to the other line. So g6, we take, and now 46%, d6, queen takes c3. So you can see here, right, in total the 2,800 games. So we are, let's say, approximately 1 in 300 games. And in the course, I continue a little bit further, and you can see the most played move is queen f6. And why do I make it trainable? Because it's very important as a beginner that you don't trade pieces, right? Black has lost the right to castle. The diagonal a1, h8 is very weak, and we like to attack, and we don't want to trade queens if possible. But in this case, because we weakened this diagonal, right, we can play bishop b2, and you can see the evaluation +4, right? Because after queen takes c3, bishop takes c3, black loses their rook or has to give up a knight with knight f6. So that was very useful to weaken this diagonal with g6, because now we have this attack with the b2 bishop on the rook on h8, and we are taking advantage of it. So it was instrumental to make this work. And right, if black doesn't take, then of course um, we have also a discovered attack by moving the queen. So it is a very strong variation. So important to include the check on h5. So here we are. Let's quickly look, queen d5, right? We had one other line here, which was king f8. And we said king f8 is already below our threshold. But also here, I included a few games. And now you can see knight f6 is the most played line. But in the course, I only included queen f6 because I would like beginners to know how to deal with the threat now that this diagonal has not been weakened. And there is a um, tactical reason why we don't have to trade queens. And if you have, right, so after queen f6, we play queen c2 because black cannot take because of the discovered attack and the queen. And a lot of beginning players, they are excited to practice this. And I included it because I could, of course, stop here, but I just wanted to give beginners a little bit more support in understanding why the queens don't have to be traded. So the most played move was knight f6, right? And then we just continue. and we play the most frequently played moves. And now you can see the pressure, right? So I was saying in the beginning, this is a common thing. Pressure on the king. White is threatening to play e5 with an attack on both d6 and knight on f6. And you can see the evaluation, plus 2.5. And if we go deeper, it would go higher. So this is most played, and, but not a trainable, because we are already below the threshold of 1 in 100. So this is, you could say, so let's go back. We are here, right? So we investigated d takes c3, 64,000 games, most played in 53% of the cases. So let's move on to the second most popular move, which is which is the move d6. So now we take, right? And in 91% of the cases, the bishop goes back. So here we are, right? And now I included a move, and you can see, which is d5. I included it because black often makes the wrong choice. So in the master, um, in the Evans Gambit Master course, the recommendation is to go knight c3 and just enjoy the fact that you have more control over the center, more space, and you have to work it. But in the beginner's guide, I had included the move d5. And you can see immediately there are only 2,400 games left. So when we consider that we started at 824,000, we are again below 1 in 300. So this is rare, right? This is rare. You can see in 2/3 of the cases, black makes a decisive mistake by playing knight e5. So it is like in 2/3 of the cases, you get immediately a winning game. And in the other cases, you get equality. So in the course, there is knight e5 and knight a5. Those are the two trainables. But you can see this is only in 290 games. And if I look to the top 10 most common made mistakes, 3 of them are related to this knight a5. So if I look to the masters, right, you can see there are only 3 games and it's only knight a5. So at a master level, knight a5 is the move that will be played over 2,200. But at a beginner's level, in 2/3 of the cases, you will find knight e5. And after knight takes e5, d takes e5, we play our move, bishop a3. Right? So now black can no longer castle at the moment. And in the course, I included a line with bishop d4 because I think some beginner players might be saying, I'm afraid that I will lose the exchange after bishop d4. And where is my compensation? Because for beginning players, it is very hard to gauge, let's say, more space and attack on the king and a lead in development versus a material deficit. And so let me show you, right? So after bishop d4, right, we just allow taking. Now the pawn on e5 is under attack, right? And most played is now the move f6. And then we blow up the complete center with f4 and now after e takes f4, e5. And you can see we have a completely winning attack. So this was included because it's not the most popular move, right? So I could stop after this, you could say, and say, okay, right? If you look at after bishop a3, there are only 283 games left. But again, to give the beginning players a little bit of support, I selected one line where a beginning player might say, oops, I'm losing the exchange. Where is my compensation? And then you see that you get a crushing attack and you open the lines of the rook and attack the pawn on e5. And with the strong bishops, um, white is winning. And so after the other options, right, knight e7, so you can see we just develop. And also here, white is much better. So to come back on bishop b6, so d5, right? Immediately you get into territory of less than 300 games. And in 2/3 of the cases, black makes the mistake by playing knight e5. But I included one line with knight a5, and I would like to have your feedback whether you like to have this in the course, because as I mentioned, 3 out of the top 10 most common mistakes are related to this line, right? Because here, white doesn't play bishop d3, but bishop d2, attacking the pawn on g7, which is for a lot of beginning players not natural. And so it continues. So after knight f6, right? Some players, they want to continue with e5 or do something else. But you can see it's only 289 games. So it 800, 8,000 is 1 in 100. So this is 1 in 3,000, less than 1 in 3,000. So very low chance. And I'd like to know if you would like it as an informational, whether you would like to keep it as a line, or whether you like to have it as an alternate. So this is not an alternate line, but the alternate would allow you to train it or to skip it. Because priority does not work at the moment for this course. So let's go back to this position. Right? So here we saw d takes c3. Just to recap, we had bishop takes f7, right, with the double attack, and then the check on h5. And then if we go back, after d6, we take and play d5, and then after knight e5, knight takes e5, we play bishop a3. And we get a very strong attack. So what are we left with? With knight f6. So let's have a look at this, right? So now you can see actually what is going on, right? The knight on c6 and f6 are not stable. Black completely controls the center. And Larry Kaufman said, if you give white 2 extra tempi, so then it's 2.5 because white is to start. White is already winning, and you can see that this is a situation, right, where white has 2 extra tempi. And in the course, right, we continue with the move e5. So the question is why not d5? But then there's knight a5 attacking the bishop, and then it becomes very specific because black threatens to stabilize with d6. But e5 is the move to play here. So e5, and let's look at the options. right? So what are the options in this position? You can see, right? We're under the threshold of 1 in 100 in all cases. In the book, I selected knight g8, and then let's look at some other options, right? After, so let's say d5, we take, and then we take, and then we check the king, and after bishop e6, we attack the pin's piece, and we have a winning advantage. So you can see that d5 is not really an option here. And after knight e4 and queen e2, the knight on e4 is trapped, right? Because after the move d5, we take en passant, and then we're going to win the knight in the end. So that's not an option either. So we have looked at d5, we have looked at knight e4. So let me continue. Bishop takes b4. Castle, okay. And we were looking at the line, knight f6. And then we take, bishop goes away, and we play e5. And so you said d5, you take on f6 the knight, you take on g7 and you check, and then you attack the pin piece after bishop e6. After knight e4, we play queen e2. So let me go to what we didn't cover is get this knight e4. So now we just continue, right? And it's like black has no stability. You can see it's like +3. We have an enormous lead in development, and also, right? We have all kind of threats like bishop g5. Queen is almost trapped, and then we can continue with knight d5. So white has a winning attack. This leaves us with knight g8. So e5, knight g8. Most great move. And now we just develop. You can see what is most played here, knight b7. So whenever this is being played, right? So this setup with the knight on e7 is a major weakness for the pawn on f7. So we play knight g5, and after castle, queen h5. And black can resign because of the attack on f7 and the attack on h7 by all white's pieces. So we see here why bishop c5 is actually a poor move. So let's go back. We are here. We covered d takes c3, bishop takes f7. We covered d6, take on d4 and then d5, and then after knight d5, take on e5 and bishop a3. We covered knight f6, take on e4 and then push e5. So there's one left. Again, right? And now you recognize the setup of a knight on e7 and knight on c6. So again, right, we play knight g5. We don't have to move e5 included here, but again, we are attacking this f7 pawn. And after castle, queen h5, game is over. So let's go back. So we have b4, take c3, bishop c5. b4 takes castle. So what did we cover? D takes c3, bishop takes f7, d6 take on d4, followed by d5, and then knight e5. Knight takes e5, d takes e5, bishop a3, knight f6 we covered, and knight e7 we covered. We take on d4 and play knight g5. So that is the bishop c5 variation. So let's quickly go to the declined. So b4, you can see 14% of the cases, bishop e6. And now we continue a4, and we're threatening to trap the bishop with a5, because after bishop e4, we play c3 and the bishop is gone. So black has two options. And you can see here a6 and a5. Those are the most popular. So let's have a look at those. a6, let's start there. So we play knight c3, and our knight is going to d5. Right? So here the most played move is d6. Our knight goes to d5. Bishop doesn't want to be taken, and we play d3. And now, of course, right, if black would play knight f6, he would play bishop g5 and damage the pawn structure, and then follow up with, right? So if we just let me show you the knight f6, we would take here. On the next move, take here, the pawn has to go back, and then we would like to continue with knight h4, queen h5, knight f5 with the winning attack. So the best move that is played here to prevent bishop g5 is h6. And we just castle. And I would just like, right, let me just go back. So here already we're at 134 games. So you could say, if you just go back, right, you say, okay, I have to know that I continue a4. And after a6, I have to know that I continue knight c3. Then we're at 1 in 300 games. And then the plan is to put the knight on d5 and just play d3. So that's the plan, and that's why I included a few more moves to give a little bit more support to beginners. So we have the most common move, d6, knight goes to d5, d3, h6, castle, knight f6. And you can see there's only a handful of games here. And then we break by playing b5, but slightly better. So after a6, right, we are playing knight c3. There was one other option. That's only 1,000 games, so 1 in 800. Again, we put the knight on d5. So it's easy to remember that in this line, in the declined with a6, our maneuver is knight c3, knight d5, irrespective of whether black plays d6 or knight f6. Now, most often, you can see black takes, and we take with the pawn. Knight goes, and we push the bishop back. And now this is very specific. Bishop goes back. You're going to damage the pawn structure of black. And you don't have to know what follows, but it's just for support of the beginning players. Let's go to the other line. So we covered a6, just to reiterate. a6. We had two black lines, right? So after a6, we play knight c3. And we had two black lines, and in both cases, we continue with knight d5. That's our plan. And that's basically what you have to know as a beginner. So now for A5, how do we continue? We continue with B5, and after knight D5, it is important, you can see here, that most played by white is knight takes E5, that we don't take that move, play that move, because this is a big mistake. And that's why I did not stop after B5, knight D4, because you can see there are only 3,500 games. So we're below 1 in 200. But show you the way that you have to take here. And after bishop takes d4, we just take the center. And you can see, right, we're better. We have the center, and we didn't lose a pawn, so we don't have to show any compensation. So that concludes the declined, and that concludes the bishop c5 variation. And I'd like to know from you um, whether you would like shorter lines. So this depends on how you learn. So shorter lines, and then at the end of the variation, um, some guidance how you play the position, or whether you're happy with the current situation, that I also make it trainable for you to continue. So you have a little bit more support in learning the plans after the critical moves, because I think a lot of players, the way they use Chessable is that in the first round, they will read the text and look at the sidelines, but then in the spaced repetition, many players will just try to get the moves in. And then the question is whether one cycle of reading sidelines is enough to remember it. So thank you for your attention, and I'll see you with number 2 soon.